Do you envision solar panels on all these roofs someday?
Absolutely, that's my vision. And I think in 10 years from now, we will see that. People still don't know much about solar. It's changing, but it's still a relatively new technology, which really came about with having more popularity during the last 3-4 years.
Yeah.
And that's one of the obstacles. So we have to bring the word out. It's one of our jobs out there. A second thing is that the technology has matured and has become, as a result, more affordable. So these days, it just makes economically sense for commercial as well as residential customers to go solar. We have a number of partnerships. An important one is Costco. We really team up with Costco, sell solar systems to Costco members. We like to have strong alliances on the marketing side that give us the no longer just the feeling you are a crunchy guy and you are buying solar, but today it's a mainstream solution. We sell solar through employee purchase programs where people get discounts. For example, we do that together with Google. Those are just some of the things that we do with companies that will help us ultimately to bring solar to the mainstream.
So what do we have here?
Here we have the inverter that's responsible for synchronizing the electronics of the system.
Okay. What does that mean?
So it basically means that you have a certain sort of electricity produced by the solar panels. It's called DC, which stands for direct current. Whereas the grid, where your electricity normally comes from, runs on AC, which is alternate current. And this machine here, which is called the inverter, is synchronizing those two.
The electrons come down here. When do they go into the house?
Actually, the electrons don't necessarily go into the house. So you're not dependent on, is the sun shining or is it not shining? The electricity actually goes into the grid. The grid is more or less a big storage mechanism. And then you get your electricity again from the grid.
Interesting.
So that makes it much more flexible because imagine
much more stable.
You are at home. It's 10 p.m. at night. There's no sun, there's no solar electricity, you still need electricity.
Right.
And with this machine and with the electricity grid and the cooperation of the utility, it works.
Right. So I'm actually not using the electron when I plug in my toaster that's being generated on my roof, necessarily.
No, absolutely not. So one of the advantages is if a customer is not at home, doesn't consume any electricity, but still generates electricity because the sun is out, the electricity is still flowing, the meter is running backwards, and the utility now has a small power station that provides power to its grid, which other customers can use. Maybe just over the street here, the neighbor is using the electrons that this neighbor's system is producing.
I see.
So what you can now do is that a customer can come out and really decide, I have my own little utility on my roof. And it can be a residential or a commercial customers, and more make that choice.
Who else gets involved to make all this work well like that?
Typically, it would be us, would be companies like REC Solar that stand in between, that are certified to work with electricity, because quite frankly, with these things, if you do it wrong, you can kill yourself. It takes us about 4 to 5 weeks to get the process started because there's a bit of paperwork involved, and just a few days to install the system. One of the great things of this is it's very maintenance-free. It's a different form of electricity where you have electrons being produced by the panels itself. It's a very direct form of electricity generation.
Just in terms of this investment, the homeowner then has gotten some of their own capital, but there are also some incentives that are provided to help.
Actually, there are two different ways. One is the homeowner invests his own money. He might also get it through a loan, and then he gets incentives from the utility that's providing some money and from the federal government that's allowing him to offset the 30% of the cost against his taxes. That is one possibility. Another option that we offer at REC Solar to our customers is that you don't own the system. There is a financial entity that owns the system and sells the electricity to the customer. And as a result, you don't pay up front, you pay by kilowatt hour.
So you're renting, basically.
You are renting your solar system and you are paying as you consume the electricity.
You're one of the largest, if not the largest, installers of distributed solar in the US, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. REC Solar is the largest one out there. The statistics are not always clear, but last year we installed slightly more than 1,500 solar systems for residential customers and quite a few large systems for commercial customers, which makes us the largest. In terms of people, it also shows there in 2005, when I joined the company, we were 25 people. As of now, we are more than 500. Thanks, guys.
What are some of the new technologies you see coming?
Generally, what I've seen is the efficiency of these panels is increasing. Efficiency means that the power output you get for a given surface area is increasing.
Okay.
And it has increased around 1/3 over the last 6-7 years. It's a gradual trend. It becomes more efficient. More and more solar installations like this one by REC Solar are being done, and the costs are coming down.
There are limits, though, to efficiency. I mean, if you talk about the ability to convert sun to electricity, there are limits today, aren't there?
Typically, what we have here is a conversion ratio of around 15% for this array. You can go up to 20%. And where it really starts to matter if you want to get as much energy out of a small amount of surface. But in many cases, the surface is actually not the restricting factor.
To service this home, for example, that's enough.
Yeah, let's look at it. We could probably put like double of what we have here on this roof. But this customer doesn't need more electricity than what this system is providing.
Let's look at distributed solar and utility scale solar. What's your view of how those develop in California in the coming years?
We actually see at the moment that both are developing quite rapidly, but they are very different markets and very different challenges. When it comes to the utility scale solar, typically you need your own dedicated transmission lines, which is an entirely different game.
Okay.
When you have distributed energy, what you need is one customer at a time that decides, I want to have my own energy solution. Both have their own fascinations, both have their own also advantages when it comes to the electricity landscape.
Do you see utility scale solar taking off, actually becoming something of a magnitude that would be a substantial part of the electric consumption in the U.S.?
At this moment, when you look at solar, of course, it's still a very small fraction of the total energy supply. We are talking clearly less than 1%. I believe over time, this will significantly increase, both in distributed as well as to centralized. And in the US, it's primarily California, Nevada, and Arizona that are at this moment putting large utility scale systems in place. Those are systems up to 250 megawatts in size.
And their challenge is distributing the electricity within transmission lines.
Absolutely, you have the same challenges as for every big power plant. You need dedicated lines. You also need to have the off-taker for the energy. Again, the same as if you have large utility scale, coal-powered or nuclear power plant. And that's different for a distributed. You will not have a solution where you have 100% of the electricity supplied through solar. Because then nobody would have electricity at night. We would again have candles to read at night. So as a result, you need to have a good mix. One of the great things of solar is that the volatility of solar electricity generation is relatively low. In the end, volatility, what do I mean? You have a cloudy day, you have a foggy day, you produce less. Utilities are worried, of course, about the volatility of energy generation. But nonetheless, there is some volatility, and you either need to have a mix where you combine it with natural gas from a utility point of view, or you work with storage mediums. At this moment, you still don't have those powerful storage mediums like giant flywheels and all kinds of very fascinating technology they work on.
To store a large amount of electrons.
Absolutely,
and electricity.
absolutely.
There's the PV, like you install. There's also the thermal. How do you see those playing out in terms of utility scale?
There are a couple of very interesting options. Concentrating solar power, or CSP as it's often abbreviated, offers a lot of different technologies. You have Stirling engine technology, you have parabolic trough, you have Fresnel lenses. In the end, what's happening there is that a larger area of solar radiation is concentrated in one single beam, and you are using the heat energy out of that beam to then power a typical generator, steam engine. So That's a great way of using the sun. It's not only about solar PV. I actually believe that both technologies have an interesting role to play.
Okay. Do you think the concentrated or the PV makes more sense for utility versus distributed?
If you would have talked to me 2 years ago, I would actually have said concentrating solar power was more cost competitive at that time. But since then, the cost of solar PV have come down so dramatically that by now they are pretty much neck on neck.
Even utility scale?
Even utility scale. That's one of the interesting dynamics. As a result, you actually see some very site-specific conditions that are taken into account when making the decision on utility side. Do I go CSP or do I go solar PV?
In terms of distributed solar, who do you see as your competitors?
Competitors, of course, can easily be the utilities because that's where you can also buy your power. So we compete against all the big utilities in this way, since we allow homeowners to really individualize their energy generation. That's our biggest competitor.
Okay.
And what I have typically seen is first utilities try to fight solar. Then in the next stage, they tolerate it. And then in the third stage, they actually look, how can I earn money with it as well? And of course, in our trade, where we are engineering, installing, selling solar, REC Solar has a lot of small and large competitors that are out there as well.
Let's talk about growth. How fast is the distributed solar market growing?
The market is growing pretty rapidly. It has grown globally by around 50% every year. As a company at REC Solar, we have even exceeded that growth on average. And all of that not only means more homeowners having solar systems, it also means that a lot of jobs are being created. Because if you look at just on this roof here, you don't see any automation here. This is labor intensive. That is real people doing real jobs. And typically what we do in the solar industry on the installation side, we are creating 33 jobs for every 1 megawatt that we are installing.
You seem passionate about this. How much of a homeowner's decision to install solar is based on passion versus economics?
Most decision makers actually go for the economic reason. I would say 80%, 20% environmental reasons. But the great thing, those 80% that look at the financial economics as a primary reason also get converted and become much more green in their thinking once they see the system working. And I say that I'm happy about it because I myself am a solar monk. I have 3 solar systems on my own home.
And a solar watch.
And a solar watch.